Are you seriously feeding a baby from that filthy bottle? Her voice hit the room like a blade, sharp, judgmental, and already halfway through my doorway before I could answer. If you don't clean things properly, I will. Someone in this neighborhood has to protect standards. Rowan coughed once, then again, harder, and the moment his tiny body slumped against my chest, everything in the room shifted. My brain snapped into crisis mode before I even understood what she'd touched. The bottle, the formula, the smell, the chemical sting that didn't belong anywhere near an infant. "Move," I said, already dropping to the floor, stabilizing his head, checking his breathing pattern, calculating exposure based on scent alone. He went limp. She froze. "By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below." I didn't look at her again. My hands moved with precision I hadn't used since the military, techniques I couldn't unlearn even after leaving that world behind. She had no idea what she'd just triggered, and she had no idea who she'd just crossed. This wasn't just a story about bleach. It was about what happens when arrogance meets the wrong father. The EMTs hadn't even arrived yet, but I already knew. This wasn't going to end the way she thought it would. "Stay back," I told her quietly, steady and unshaken. "You've done enough." He was still breathing, shallow, irregular, but breathing. That was all I needed to keep pushing. Contrarian snapback. People like her expected men like me to panic, to stumble, to fail. Instead, I felt something settle inside me, a clarity I hadn't touched in years, the kind that once kept soldiers alive in sandstorm-blackened battlefields while alarms screamed around us, the kind that didn't care if someone was yelling, judging, or threatening fines from an HOA handbook, because my son was in trouble, and when my son was in trouble, nothing else mattered. Emotional grounding. I scooped him closer, feeling the weight of everything that had led me here, the sleepless nights, the quiet grief of raising him alone, the way he clung to my shirt like I was the whole world. He didn't have anyone else. I had promised my wife I'd protect him, even though she never lived long enough to hear that vow out loud. And now he was choking on something he never should have come near, something someone had introduced inside my own home. My hands steadied despite the sick twist in my stomach. He needed me calm. He needed me sharp. He needed every part of who I used to be. I didn't waste a second. Not on fear, not on her. The emergency protocol came instinctively. Tilt, check airway, stimulate response, measure gag reflex, prepare for induced neutralization until EMS arrived. Each motion felt like I had rehearsed it that exact morning, even though it had been years. She hovered in the doorway, the scent of her expensive perfume battling the faint chemical tang in the air. I was only trying to help," she stammered. I didn't answer. I didn't even raise my head. Her words didn't matter. Her excuses didn't matter. All that mattered was Rowan, my son, my only piece of her left in this world, and he was fighting to breathe. The sirens finally pierced the neighborhood silence. Tires screeched outside as the ambulance arrived at the curb, and I gathered Rowan tighter, ready to sprint out the door the second they hit the ground. But one truth stayed with me, steadying my grip and sharpening my resolve. Whatever she'd done, whatever she thought she could get away with under the guise of community standards, she had no idea the kind of man she had just provoked, and she wasn't ready for the truth, not about what she'd done, not about me. The EMTs were already rushing toward the porch when I stepped outside, Rowan cradled tightly against me. My heart hammered, but my hands were steady. Steady enough that one of the paramedics paused, eyes narrowing with the kind of recognition that only comes when someone sees controlled precision in the middle of chaos. "What happened?" he asked, falling into stride beside me. "Possible hypochlorite ingestion," I said. "Diluted. Respiratory reaction began 30 seconds post-exposure. Airway partially responsive. Pulse shallow, but present." They exchanged a look. Not fear, professional respect. It was the same look I used to get when I walked into field triage tents wearing a uniform I no longer had. They lowered the stretcher. I laid Rowan down, keeping one hand on his chest until the medic secured the straps. His tiny breaths rasped like sandpaper. Behind me, she hovered on the porch, rigid shoulders, wide eyes, fingers clamped around the strap of her designer bag. Guilt flickered across her face, but she swallowed it, like pride mattered more than accountability. "I didn't know," she blurted. "I thought—" The bottle looked unsanitary. The lead EMT snapped. "Ma'am, bleach around infant feeding items is extremely dangerous." Her chin jerked up. "It was only a few drops. People exaggerate these things." I turned then, not because her words deserved a response, but because she had crossed into a territory where ignorance and arrogance become lethal. My voice stayed level. "A few drops can burn an infant's airway. You should have never touched anything in my home." Her expression twisted, defensive, indignant, searching for something to use as a shield. "You left the door open. You're the one who allowed this environment to be unsafe." The accusation slid right off me. After today, her words weren't going to matter. Not against the evidence, not against the witnesses, not against the truth. The EMT attending to Rowan called out, "We're ready for transport. Dad, ride with us." I climbed into the ambulance without hesitation. The doors slammed behind me, sealing out her frantic voice. Inside, everything became quiet except the beeping vitals and Rowan's fragile breaths. The EMT across from me monitored the oxygen mask while watching me with curious caution. "You've handled this type of exposure before," he said. Not a question, but an informed guess. I stayed focused on Rowan's chest, rising and falling beneath the straps. "Something like it," I murmured. I wasn't ready to unpack the rest. Not yet, not here. My history wasn't supposed to exist in Birchstone Ridge. I had buried that part of my life the day I carried my wife's folded uniform through the base gates one last time. But crisis didn't care about boundaries. And my son didn't care who I used to be. He needed every part of me. When we reached the hospital, the ambulance doors opened to a rush of scrubbed staff waiting with equipment. The transfer was quick, seamless. And for the first time since he collapsed, I could breathe just enough to feel something beyond raw instinct. Fear. Not panic, not helplessness. Just fear. The quiet, hollow kind only a parent understands. A nurse guided me toward the hallway, assuring me they would rush Rowan into pediatric emergency. "Stay here," she said gently. "We'll update you as soon as he's stabilized." I nodded, and then finally the world slowed down. The white hallway lights buzzed faintly overhead. The scent of antiseptic filled the air, not the harsh bleach tang still clinging to the memory of my kitchen countertop. People passed by, nurses, doctors, visitors, but they all blurred into a distant hum. I leaned against the wall, pressing a hand over my eyes. The moment I closed them, I saw Rowan's face when his breathing changed. I felt the weight of everything I almost lost. I felt the echo of the moment my wife slipped through my fingers in another emergency room years ago. A sound, a silence, a memory I spent every day fighting not to relive. But today almost forced me back to it. I inhaled slowly, grounding myself the same way I used to before entering decontamination zones. 4 seconds in, hold, 4 seconds out. I wouldn't lose him, not today, not to her carelessness. Footsteps approached from the side. Everett. He looked smaller than he had on my porch, his shoulders hunched, guilt written across every line of his face. "Silas, I came as soon as I heard the ambulance leave." I gave a short nod, still leaning against the wall. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, I did." His voice cracked. I should have stopped her. He swallowed hard. "She kept saying the bottle looked unsanitary. I told her it wasn't her place, but she wouldn't listen. She pulled out that cloth. She must have dipped it in that solution she carries for inspections. I didn't know what she was doing until I saw her tip it over the bottle." His breath trembled. "She thought she was cleaning," he whispered, "but she wouldn't let me get a word in." The admission didn't surprise me. It only confirmed what I already understood. This wasn't malice, but entitlement mixed with reckless ego, and that combination was just as dangerous. "You need to tell that to the police," I said quietly. He nodded, eyes damp. "I will." Before I could respond, a nurse stepped into the hallway. "Sir, your son is stabilizing. He's responding well." She offered a small, soft smile. "You acted fast. You probably saved him." Relief washed through me so fast it almost knocked me off the wall. My knees softened, my chest loosened, and for the first time since the ordeal began, I let myself exhale. But underneath that relief, another emotion simmered. Something steadier, sharper. Determination. Because Rowan was safe, but justice hadn't arrived yet. And when it did, she wasn't ready for how much truth was coming with it. The nurse's reassurance still echoed in my ears. He's stabilizing. You probably saved him. When she led me toward the pediatric unit, relief settled into my chest, heavy but grounding, like sand after a hard windstorm. The hallway felt less hostile now, less like a battlefield I'd been dragged into. But beneath that relief, something colder and more precise crystallized. This wasn't over. She had walked into my home. She had touched my son's bottle. She had introduced a chemical that could have taken him from me forever. And every second since, she'd been clinging to excuses instead of accountability. I stepped into the room where Rowan lay under warm lights, small and fragile but breathing with steadier rhythm. Tubes and monitors framed him like a protective halo. A nurse adjusted his vitals and nodded at me before slipping out, giving me space. I took the tiny hand resting beside him, barely the size of my thumb. His fingers curled weakly around mine. That was the moment everything inside me locked into place. She may have triggered this crisis, but I was going to be the one who finished it, with truth, with evidence, with the expertise I'd spent years trying to forget. If I had to walk back into the world I walked away from, so be it. My son was worth every step. A soft knock came from the doorway. A police officer stood there, uniform crisp, notebook in hand, expression neutral but attentive. Mr. Marrow? Yeah. I didn't let go of Rowan's hand. I'm Officer Kellen. We spoke briefly at your house. I need to get a statement, if you're up for it. I nodded once. I'm ready. He stepped inside, leaning slightly against the counter but keeping respectful distance. Your neighbor already claimed she was cleaning the bottle with a disinfectant. We need your version of what happened. I kept my eyes on Rowan. Talking about it meant reliving every second, but avoiding it wasn't an option. She wasn't invited in, I said. She entered during an inspection, but crossed the line the moment she handled anything inside. Do you know what she put in the bottle? Diluted sodium hypochlorite, bleach. My voice stayed calm, clinical, unshaken. I smelled it before he even reacted, and her cloth had visible residue. His pen paused in midair. You're certain? Yes. I lifted my gaze then, meeting his eyes with the steady coldness of someone who had spent years identifying chemical hazards in war zones. I've trained for chemical exposure events, years of it. That made him straighten. What kind of training? Air Force Biodefense Engineering Corps. I said it quietly, like stating a fact rather than bragging. My job was to identify and neutralize field exposure threats. He blinked, the shift in his expression unmistakable, respect mixed with concern. That explains how fast you acted? I didn't respond. That part wasn't about skill. That part was about being a father. Officer Kellen wrote rapidly, flipping to a clean page. There's something else? A neighbor reported she heard you say your son reacted within 30 seconds? Yes, that's typical of low-dose ingestion in infants. The chemical burns the throat, triggers a spasm, interrupts airway control. He swallowed, visibly unsettled by the clinical breakdown. Do you still have the bottle? He asked. It's at home, wrapped properly. Wrapped? In sterile containment, gloves, sealed bag, isolated. My tone was dead calm. Chain of custody will hold. He let out a slow breath. Okay, I'll send a patrol unit to recover it. They'll photograph everything before moving it. But based on what you're saying, this is more serious than she thinks. I nodded once. It is? As he closed his notebook, Everett approached hesitantly from the hallway, wringing his hands. The moment he saw Rowan, his face crumpled. Oh, God, he whispered. Is he? He's stable, I said, softer than before. Everett nodded shakily, then turned to the officer. I'll give my statement too. I saw her do it. I told her not to touch anything. She ignored me. The officer listened as Everett explained everything. Her arrogance, her insistence on sanitizing, the way she dismissed his warnings. He described the cloth, the tote bag, the exact moment he saw her tilted over the bottle. With every detail he offered, I felt the last lingering question marks evaporate. There would be no alternate narrative, no twisting of facts, no escaping the truth. When Everett finished, he looked at me with glassy eyes. I'm sorry, I should have stopped her. You tried, I said. That matters. But inside, a quieter thought surfaced. trying isn't enough when a child's life is at stake. Officer Kellen closed his notebook. Mr. Marrow, I'll return once the evidence is collected. I can't promise immediate charges yet, but based on what you both said, we're moving in that direction. He offered a small nod and stepped out. Everett lingered, guilt swirling in his expression like storm clouds. She's going to deny everything, he whispered. She thinks the rules don't apply to her. That's why we don't rely on opinions, I said. We rely on evidence. The victory strategy was already advancing, quietly but unmistakably. Public exposure wasn't just coming, it was becoming unavoidable. Everett looked at Rowan again, voice breaking. She doesn't know who you used to be. That's never been the point, I said gently. But deep down, I knew the truth. Who I used to be was exactly why she wasn't going to win. Rowan exhaled, slower, steadier. I tightened my grip around his tiny hand. The crisis had passed. Now came the reckoning. Rowan's breathing steadied with each passing minute, but I didn't loosen my grip on his tiny hand. Not yet. The monitors continued their rhythmic beeping, a quiet reminder that we were still inside a controlled battlefield, the kind where life didn't ask permission before shifting direction. Everett sat on the small vinyl chair across the room, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor like he was afraid to look anywhere else. I keep replaying it, he murmured. If I'd stepped in faster, if I'd taken the cloth away. You spoke up, I said. She ignored you. That's on her. The guilt clung to him anyway, like a stain he couldn't scrub off. A soft knock interrupted the moment. Officer Kellen stepped in again, radio clipped to his shoulder, expression more purposeful this time. Mr. Marrow, we recovered the bottle from your home. Your containment was extremely meticulous. I nodded. It needed to be. We also photographed the scene, her tote bag, and the cleaning cloth on the counter, he continued. The residue matches the description you gave. We'll send everything to the lab, but initial tests confirm bleach presence. Everett let out a shaky breath. I stayed silent, waiting. Kellen flipped open his notebook. We also spoke to neighbors. Several mentioned seeing her enter your home without clear permission. Some said she'd been vocal about your clutter and unsanitary environment. One even said she bragged about taking matters into her own hands. That wasn't surprising. She'd always treated the community like her personal kingdom. What happens next? Everett asked, his voice thin. Next, Kellen said, we bring her in for questioning. He paused, turning to me again. Your expertise, your rapid response, that's already built a strong foundation for this case. But there's something else. When we arrived, your instructions to the EMTs, most civilians don't speak like that. You gave exact exposure markers. For the first time, I met his eyes with full awareness of what he was asking, not verbally, but silently. Years of training, I said. In environments where hesitation cost lives, his jaw tightened with respect. Well, that training may end up being what holds this case together. He left the room with a brief nod, closing the door behind him. Everett swallowed hard. She's going to twist everything. You know she will. She's powerful. She knows people. She doesn't like being challenged. Powerful wasn't the word I would have used. Loud, maybe. Entitled. Reckless. Dangerous in the way people become dangerous when they believe rules apply to everyone but themselves. But real power didn't scream at doorways or wave around homeowner regulations. Real power stayed quiet until the moment it mattered. And that moment was coming. I sat back, the chair creaking beneath me as the weight of the day caught up. My mind returned to the corridor, the bottle, her careless arrogance, the way she dismissed bleach like it was water, the way she acted like my son's safety was secondary to her standards. I don't get it, Everett whispered suddenly. Why do you stay there, in Birchstone Ridge? You could live anywhere. I looked at him, really looked. He wasn't asking out of nosiness. He was asking out of a desire to understand the person he had watched work quietly for years without ever really seeing. I needed somewhere stable, I said. Somewhere quiet, somewhere I could raise him without distractions. The memories pressed in at the edges, sandstorms, alarms, containment breaches, the sound of things exploding in the distance. And then the hospital room, where they told me she wouldn't wake up. My wife, my partner in every sense except the one that kept her alive. Birchstone Ridge wasn't perfect, but it was supposed to be safe. You deserve better, Everett said softly. It's not about me, I answered. A nurse returned to check Rowan's vitals. She smiled when she saw the improvement. He's strong, she murmured. Kids bounce back faster than we expect. He's had to be, I whispered, brushing my thumb along his small knuckles. When she left, Everett exhaled shakily. The police. They're going to arrest her, aren't they? They will, I said. Evidence doesn't lie. And she won't forgive me for telling them what I saw. You didn't do anything wrong. He shook his head. In her world, the truth is wrong if it inconveniences her. That was the moment I realized Everett wasn't just a witness. He was part of the reason she'd gotten away with so much. Not because he enabled her, but because he never stopped her. Maybe today would change that. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Officer Kellen. She's at the station. She's already denying everything. We'll update soon. I stared at the text for a long moment before slipping the phone away. She had started this, but she wasn't going to dictate the ending. Everett leaned forward again. Silas, she's going to come after you. Even after the arrest, she doesn't know how to lose. I looked at Rowan, then at Everett. She already lost, I said quietly. She just doesn't know it yet. Because justice didn't start with charges. It started with truth, and today, truth was on my side. Tonight, the walls of Birchstone Ridge would hear a different kind of story. One where the quiet maintenance man wasn't the one who bowed. One where the woman who thought she ruled everything would finally face the consequence she had earned. And this time, the entire community would see it. She already lost. She just didn't know it yet. That thought stayed with me long after Everett left the hospital room to call his wife. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow across Rowan's blankets. His breathing was steady now, soft, rhythmic, fragile, but fighting. I rested my palm over his back, grounding myself in the rise and fall of his tiny body. Everything else could wait. Justice could wait. The world outside could wait. But not him. A nurse came in briefly, checked his vitals again, then quietly updated his chart. He's improving faster than expected, she said gently. You caught it early. She paused, studying me with a kind of cautious curiosity. Most parents don't recognize chemical exposure this quickly. I just nodded. Explaining wasn't something I needed to do. Not now, not here. When she left, the silence settled again, until my phone buzzed. A message from Officer Kellen. We're preparing charges. Need your formal statement at the station once Rowan is cleared. Good. The gears were turning, slow but turning. Another message followed seconds later. Also, she's still insisting she only cleaned what you neglected. She's angling for negligence on your part. Just a heads up. Negligence. The word burned hotter than bleach ever could. I looked down at Rowan, at the tubes, at the oxygen mask, at the faint redness around his lips, and something cold and unwavering settled in the center of my chest. She wasn't just denying responsibility, she was trying to shift the blame onto me, onto the father who'd done everything to keep his newborn alive. And if there was one thing my old life had taught me, it was that arrogance always reveals itself in the smallest cracks before collapsing entirely. I didn't reply to Kellen, not yet. A moment later, Rowan's eyes fluttered open. Just barely, but enough. His hand twitched, searching reflexively, and I pressed my fingers into his palm until he curled around me. A faint sound escaped him, a whimper, weak but determined. Hey, I whispered, you're okay. I'm right here. His eyes closed again, but the grip stayed. That was enough to pull everything back into focus. I would handle the rest. A few hours passed. The doctors monitored him, adjusted his fluids, and confirmed he was stable enough to leave intensive observation soon. I stayed the entire time, letting the world shrink into this one small room with its steady beeping and sterile air. Eventually, another knock came. Not the timid kind from Everett, not the professional kind from a nurse. A familiar, heavier one. Officer Kellen stepped inside, hat tucked under one arm, the other holding a file. Good news, he said softly. Your son's going to be okay. Doctors filled us in. I nodded once. Thank you. He set the file on the counter. But we've got something else. I didn't speak. I waited. Her story is falling apart, he continued. Every neighbor we spoke to described her as confrontational, overbearing, and obsessed with enforcing rules that aren't even in the HOA bylaws. And Everett gave one of the clearest eyewitness accounts I've ever recorded. Good, I said quietly. Kellen sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. She's convinced this is still salvageable. She keeps saying she improved sanitation, and that you should have thanked her. She even mentioned filing a complaint about you. I let out a breath, slow, controlled. She's doubling down. She is. And that's exactly why this case is shifting from accidental contamination to reckless endangerment. He lowered his voice. Truthfully, she's digging her own grave. I didn't smile, not even inwardly. This wasn't victory, not yet. What do you need from me? I asked. Your official statement, a timeline, your expertise to confirm the exposure reaction. He hesitated, then added, and, if possible, some documentation of your background. It'll strengthen the case. I nodded. I can bring what you need. He straightened. We'll escort you home when you're ready. As he turned to leave, he paused. By the way, a couple of the nurses recognized your old unit insignia. You kept it on your wallet. My hand instinctively brushed the pocket where the faded emblem rested. I hadn't realized it was visible. They asked me if you really were who they thought you were. I said nothing. He gave a small, respectful nod. I told them yes, and that your son was lucky to have you. When he left, the room felt heavier, but clearer. This was the beginning of the second phase of the victory strategy, the shift into discovery, the moment when truth began to surface in ways she couldn't control or silence. Everett returned a short while later, red-eyed but calmer. My wife's taking care of things at home, he said quietly. I'm ready to testify whenever you need me. You're doing the right thing, I told him. I know. He swallowed. But she's not going to take this quietly. She's already calling board members, trying to spin her story. She can spin whatever she wants, I said. She can't rewrite evidence. He nodded, even if he didn't fully believe it yet. Outside the room, nurses moved with steady purpose. The hospital hummed with life, again. The worst was behind us. But the reckoning wasn't. Rowan stirred, fingers tightening around mine again. I leaned in close, brushing a hand over his soft hair. She thinks she knows how this ends, I whispered to him. But she has no idea who she picked a fight with. Not the maintenance man, not the quiet neighbor. A father with nothing left to lose, and everything to protect. She has no idea who she picked a fight with. Those words lingered in my mind long after the room settled back into stillness. I stayed beside Rowan, watching the faint rise and fall of his chest, committing each steady breath to memory. Every improvement, every blink, every quiet sigh was a small victory I refused to overlook. The hospital felt colder now, not in temperature, but in meaning. Hospitals always carried two truths for me, life regained and life lost. Rowan was on the first path. My wife had been on the second. That memory tightened something inside my chest, but it also clarified my purpose. A nurse returned with paperwork. We expect he'll be moved from observation in a couple of hours, she said with a gentle smile. He's doing well, really well. Thank you, I murmured, not taking my eyes off him. She hesitated a moment. Some officers were talking outside. They said you saved him before the ambulance even got there. Most parents freeze up. You didn't. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. It wasn't bravery, it wasn't training, it was necessity. When she left, I finally allowed myself to sink into the chair beside the bed, exhaustion creeping in. But before it could settle, Officer Kellen returned, this time with a more serious expression. Mr. Marrow, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. We have a complication. I straightened. What kind? She's contacted an attorney. Expected. She's claiming you created an unsafe environment and that she intervened out of concern. She's saying you fabricated the contamination story because she was holding you accountable. She's also saying Everett made a false statement under your influence. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed calm. And the evidence? Oh, the evidence is real, he said. But she's trying to muddy the water. Her lawyer is pushing to reframe it as a misunderstanding, not a criminal act. She walked into my home and contaminated my son's bottle, I said evenly. There's nothing to misunderstand. She's banking on public confusion, he replied. Most of the HOA board is already whispering. Some are defending her out of fear. Some are saying you're blowing things out of proportion. Everett flinched beside me. Of course she'd use her influence. People like her always did. But influence didn't override chemical burns in an infant's throat. Influence didn't erase medical reports. Influence didn't erase truth. What's the next step? I asked. We'll run the lab tests, build a stronger case, and gather every piece of witness testimony we can, he said. But I need something else now. Your official recount of the exposure pattern, detailed, technical, the kind only someone with your background can provide. My background. There it was, the part of me I'd tried to bury, the part I left behind when my wife died, and I walked away from a world that took too much from us. But burying it didn't change the fact that it was still inside me. What you provide, he continued, could make the charge stick even if she tries to twist the narrative. I exhaled slowly. You'll get everything you need. He nodded. Then we'll move this forward. As soon as he left, Everett let out a shaky breath. She's unbelievable, even now. This is who she is, I said quietly. She doesn't care about truth, only control. But she could still turn the board against you, he whispered. She won't have the chance. I stood, brushing Rowan's hair again, before stepping toward the small window. The late afternoon sun cast gold patterns across the tile floor. I watched the shadows shift, thinking of how easily people misjudge the quiet ones, how they mistake stillness for weakness, humility for submission. She had made that mistake the moment she stepped into my home, and she was still making it now. What are you going to do? Everett asked, voice small. Exactly what I was trained to do, I said. Document, verify, and expose the truth. He swallowed. She'll come after you, harder than before. She can try. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The calmness was enough. The same calmness that had steadied me through chemical threats, unstable compounds, high-risk lab zones, and nights when the wrong breath could kill a dozen people. I wasn't intimidated by someone who hid behind HOA bylaws. A nurse stepped in again, this time with a clipboard. Mr. Marrow, he's cleared for discharge in a few hours. We'll give you the reports for the police. Perfect. Documentation, medical confirmation, timeline, all essential for what came next. After she left, Everett spoke again, almost whispering. You're not just a maintenance guy, are you? I didn't confirm. I didn't deny. I didn't need to. But he nodded anyway, as if understanding finally clicked into place. She picked the wrong man to challenge. My gaze stayed fixed on my son. She picked the wrong child to endanger. Outside the room, I heard a phone ringing, someone speaking sharply, hurried steps echoing down the hallway. The world was moving quickly now, faster than she realized, and faster than she could control. When Rowan let out a soft sigh and shifted against the blankets, I made my promise again. Quiet, fierce, unbreakable. No matter what she tries next, I whispered, I'll make sure she answers for what. She did. Not out of vengeance, not out of pride, but out of the one truth stronger than any rule, regulation, or excuse. A father protects his child. And she had crossed the one line I'd never forgive. No matter what she tries next, I'll make sure she answers for what she did. That promise still echoed in my mind hours later as I carried Rowan out of the hospital, wrapped carefully in his soft blanket. The cool evening air hit us first, clean, crisp, nothing like the antiseptic hum of the pediatric ward we'd lived in since morning. He stirred against my chest, warm and safe. That warmth kept me steady. Officer Kellen walked beside us. We'll drive you home, he said. Protocol during an active investigation. Fine, I replied. But inside, I understood the real reason. She wasn't going to vanish quietly into embarrassment. She was going to lash out, twist things, manipulate whoever she could. And Kellen knew it. Everett followed a few steps behind, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, shoulders slumped with exhaustion and guilt. He hadn't left our side since the hospital, though he barely spoke after the last officer update. It was clear he was carrying the kind of weight only someone complicit through silence could feel. When we reached the patrol vehicle, I secured Rowan's car seat gently in the back. He barely opened his eyes, but his lips smacked sleepily, and he curled inward with tiny fingers gripping the blanket. That alone made my chest tighten with gratitude. Everett cleared his throat. When we get back, do you want me to talk to the other board members to explain what happened? I studied him for a moment. Only if you're doing it because it's right, not because you're afraid of her. He swallowed. I think I've been afraid of her for a long time. You don't have to be anymore. He nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Maybe fear didn't leave that quickly. The ride back to Birchstone Ridge was quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of the patrol car and Rowan's faint, steady breaths. Streetlights flickered past the window, like slow-moving comets. By the time we pulled into the community's entrance, something in my pulse sharpened again. She'd be waiting. Of course she would. The HOA office building lights were still on, glowing like an accusation at the far end of the courtyard. As we stepped out, I noticed her car parked crookedly across two spaces, the same entitlement written in metal and chrome. Kellen noticed too. She's here. Let's get this over with, I said. I lifted Rowan's seat and we walked toward the office. Everett kept glancing between me and the building, as though expecting an explosion. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh, buzzing faintly over the tastefully decorated walls. Photos of pristine lawns, strict posters about community rules, smiling families staged in perfect symmetry. She stood near the Long's conference table, arms crossed, face set in icy composure. And beside her was another board member, Arthur Price, a man who hid cowardice behind expensive suits and thin smiles. "There he is," she snapped the moment we entered, "bringing the police into our community. Do you enjoy creating chaos?" Kellen stepped forward before I could respond. "Ma'am, we're here to collect your official statement. You were informed of that." She lifted her chin. "And I will give it. But I have every right to address the person accusing me." I set Rowan's seat down on the nearest chair. "My son nearly died. I'm not interested in your theatrics." Her eyes widened, and the false innocence cracked for a moment. "You're twisting everything. I was trying to help you. Your home is cluttered, unsafe. You left a dirty bottle on the counter." "Stop," Everett said sharply, her head whipped toward him. "Excuse me?" "You weren't helping," he said. His voice trembled, but his resolve didn't. "You didn't even give him a chance to explain. You walked in. You took out that cloth. You poured that solution into the baby's bottle. I saw it." Silence fell. Her lips parted, shock breaking across her face before she smoothed it back. "You're lying. He's manipulated you. He's turning you against your own board." I stepped forward then, slowly, calmly, the way I used to walk toward volatile substances back when hesitation meant death. "I didn't manipulate anyone," I said, "and your problem isn't the truth. It's that your lies don't hold up under pressure." She scoffed. "Pressure? From you?" "Yes," I answered quietly. "From me." She opened her mouth again, but Kellen stepped between us. "Ms. Ashford, you need to stop speaking unless you want to make your situation worse. We have evidence, we have eyewitness testimony, and we have medical confirmation." Arthur finally spoke. "Marlene, maybe we should—" "No," she snapped. "I won't be bullied by someone who barely belongs here." Everett winced. Kellen's jaw tightened. The whole room felt colder. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step any closer. I didn't need to. "You walked into my home," I said quietly. "You contaminated a newborn's bottle. You watched him collapse. And instead of apologizing, you're doubling down." She glared. "You think you can threaten me? You're just the maintenance man." Everett closed his eyes. And then I said it. Not loudly, not dramatically, just factually. "I was a biodefense engineer for the United States Air Force." Her face drained of color. "Everything you touched was documented, contained, verified, and I know precisely how to prove what you did. So yes, if you want to talk about pressure, you're going to feel all of it." The room went still. Kellen broke the silence. "Ms. Ashford, you're coming with us to the station, now." Her voice cracked. "You can't do this. I didn't mean, I was only—" But the moment she realized no one was stepping in to save her, not Arthur, not Everett, not anyone, the fight drained out of her like someone had unplugged her entirely. As they escorted her out, she looked at me over her shoulder, fear, disbelief, and anger swirling all at once, and I finally saw it. She didn't fear consequences. She feared exposure, which meant the victory strategy was working exactly the way it needed to. Arthur's face remained pale long after the patrol car carrying her disappeared down the community's main road. The HOA office felt different now, emptier, like the walls themselves were relieved someone finally stopped her. Everett stood beside me, hands trembling slightly, not from fear anymore, but from the shock of watching the truth finally surface. "She was really arrested," he whispered. "She was," I said, "and she didn't expect it." "No, people like her rarely do." He exhaled shakily and sank into one of the conference chairs. For the first time since all this began, he didn't seem afraid of her shadow. He seemed afraid of having stayed silent for so long. Arthur cleared his throat. "Silas, about everything that happened, I don't need an apology," I said before he could finish. "I just need honesty from here on." He looked away, ashamed. "You'll have it." I doubted that, but I didn't need his allegiance. I needed the truth, the evidence, and the proper process. And right now, those were finally aligning. I bent down to lift Rowan's car seat again. He was still asleep, his tiny lips parted, his breath soft and even. Seeing him like this, safe, away from the chaos, made the earlier surge of adrenaline shift into something heavier. Protective. Focused. Kellen returned a moment later, stepping into the office with a purposeful stride. "She's at the station," he said. "She's demanding her lawyer, which is fine, but she's also attempting to contact board members to restate events. We confiscated her phone to prevent interference." "Good," I replied. "How long until charges are formal?" "Within the next 24 hours, he said. "But there's something you should know. She's pushing hard on the narrative that this was all a misunderstanding. According to her, you overreacted because you were embarrassed about the condition of your home." Everett's face twisted in disbelief. "Embarrassed? His house is spotless." "It doesn't matter," I said quietly. "She's trying to confuse the board, make them question what they saw." "Kellen," I asked, "did you capture her statement before you brought her in?" "We did," he said, "and it contradicts everything she told the first responders." "Good. That was the crack that always exposes people who lie under pressure." "Also," he added, "we've contacted the state's child protective division, not against you," he clarified quickly. "Against her. They consider this a direct concern for infant safety." That meant the chain of consequences was widening, further than she ever imagined. Before anyone could speak again, the door swung open. A woman stepped inside, a middle-aged resident named Grace Whitlock, someone I'd seen around but never spoken to. She looked rattled. "I heard what happened," she said breathlessly. "Is it true? She's really been taken in?" Kellen nodded. "Yes, ma'am. She's at the station being processed." Grace pressed a hand to her chest. I should have spoken sooner. We all should have. She's been terrorizing families here for years, threatening fines, entering homes without notice, calling people health hazards because their kids left toys outside." Arthur stiffened. Everett winced. I stayed silent. Grace continued, voice trembling. "She punished a single mother last year because she had laundry hanging on the balcony. She humiliated an elderly couple over their garden. And now," her gaze lowered to Rowan, "now she hurt a child." "She didn't care about safety," I said. "She cared about control." "And she always hid behind policy," Grace whispered. "We knew it. We were afraid to say anything. But this," she swallowed, "this changes everything." Her words weren't dramatic. They weren't emotional outbursts. They were truth spoken for the first time by someone who finally felt safe enough to say it. That, more than anything, signaled how close we were to the final reversal. I lifted Rowan's seat again. "I need to take him home," I said. "He deserves rest." "I'll escort you," Kellen replied. Outside, the air was cool again, the kind that settles after a storm, but hints another one might be forming. The sun had dipped low, streaking the sky with faint amber. The community was quieter than I'd ever seen it, windows lit, blinds shifting, silhouettes watching from behind curtains. Everyone had seen the patrol car. Everyone had seen her taken away. The exposure had already begun. When we reached my driveway, Everett hesitated. "Silas, if you need anything at all, just call me. I want to help." I nodded. "I know, and you will." He didn't fully understand what I meant, but he would soon. Because the next phase wasn't just about exposing her. It was about dismantling the structure she'd built. The one that allowed someone like her to hurt families without fear of consequence. Inside, I carried Rowan to his crib. He stirred slightly but didn't wake, just curled into the familiar softness of home. I stood there for a long moment, watching the slow rise and fall of his tiny chest, feeling my resolve harden with every breath he took. Then my phone buzzed again, a message from an unknown number. "You don't know what you've started. You're going to regret this." She was already trying to reach me through proxies, through shadows. I looked at the message, then deleted it. "You picked the wrong man," I whispered into the quiet room, "and the wrong child. Because when a man's purpose is clear, fear loses its power, and my purpose had never been clearer. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below." The message, "You're going to regret this," lingered like a dark fingerprint across my screen even after I deleted it. I didn't need to guess who sent it. She might have been in custody, but her reach, her ego, and her need to maintain control didn't stop at a police station door. People like her always had someone willing to carry their threats for them, but fear didn't tighten my chest. Not this time. Not after holding my son's hand in that hospital room, memorizing the fragile weight of each breath. I stepped quietly out of Rowan's room, closing the door halfway so the soft nightlight cast a warm glow over his crib. He slept peacefully, his tiny hand curled into a loose fist. That image alone was enough to keep my resolve steady. Downstairs, the house felt too quiet. Not the comforting kind, but the kind that invited thoughts to crawl through every corner. I sat at the small dining table, pulled out my old field notebook, and began sketching the timeline with precision. Exposure minute, reaction pattern, scent analysis, neutralization steps, EMT arrival, medical findings. Facts mattered. Facts didn't bend under pressure. As I worked, headlights swept across the living room window. A car slowed, then parked crookedly right across my driveway. My jaw clenched, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. A knock followed, 3 sharp taps, the kind meant to announce authority or confrontation. I opened the door. Arthur stood there, rumpled, breathing heavily, eyes darting nervously. He looked nothing like the confident board member from earlier. He looked shaken. I needed to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for invitation. "Something's happening." I stayed where I was. "What is it?" He wrung his hands. "Her husband called me." I raised an eyebrow. "She has a husband?" Arthur nodded stiffly. "He's out of town, but he's furious about the arrest, about the board making her look bad. He wants an emergency meeting tomorrow morning, and he's insisting the board support her version of events." Of course. The arrogance wasn't limited to one person. It was a culture she'd cultivated, fed, manipulated. "What version is she giving now?" I asked. That she walked in, saw a dangerously unsanitary bottle, and tried to wipe it out of concern. Arthur swallowed. "She's framing you as unstable, saying you panicked and faked contamination because she embarrassed you." Everett, who had joined us earlier, paced behind the couch now, his hands tightening in the fabric of his jacket. "She's insane," he muttered. "Did he threaten you?" "Not directly," Arthur said. "But he implied that if the board doesn't protect her, he'll sue everyone involved, including you, Silas." I let out a slow breath. "He can try." Arthur looked up sharply. "That's not what I came to say?" "Then what?" His shoulders sagged. "I know what she did. I know what she's done for years. I've stayed quiet because she made it feel easier. But tonight, I couldn't sleep. Not after seeing the ambulance. Not after watching your son carried out." I didn't speak, neither did Everett. We waited. Arthur sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "She came to my house last month," he whispered, screaming about how my kids left scooters near the walkway. "She threatened to fine me, to publicly embarrass my family. She said she'd make an example out of us if we didn't fall in line." His voice cracked. "I've been scared of her, too." It didn't excuse his silence, but it explained it. Finally, he lifted his head. "I'm not protecting her anymore. I'll testify. I'll tell the police everything she's done, and I'll tell the board what I saw today." Everett exhaled a shaky sigh of relief. "Thank you," he said softly. But Arthur wasn't done. "She's called 4 other board members already," he continued. She's spinning a narrative that you're dangerous, unstable, and manipulating Everett. His gaze flicked to the other man. She's insisting the board issue a collective statement defending her. Everett's fists clenched. She's trying to bury the truth. Arthur nodded. Yes, but she doesn't know I'm here. I studied him. Why come to me? Because, he whispered, voice trembling. Someone needs to tell you what you're walking into tomorrow. And because I'm tired of being afraid of her. I leaned back slightly, letting his confession sink in. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It wasn't even about exposing her. It was about dismantling the system she'd built on intimidation and silence. She's losing control, I said quietly. And when people like her lose control, they get desperate. Arthur nodded. Exactly. That's why I wanted to warn you. Good, I said. Because tomorrow, I'm not walking into that meeting alone. Everett looked up. What do you mean? I glanced between the two of them. Tomorrow, I said, we take this from police custody to public exposure, in the place she values most. The board meeting? Arthur asked. Yes, I said. The room where she believes she owns the truth, the room where she thinks her reputation will save her. Everett swallowed. Silas, are you sure? She'll try to turn the whole room against you. She can try, I said. But the difference between us and her is simple. She relies on fear. And you? Arthur asked. Evidence, I answered. And the truth. A long silence followed. A shifting moment, quiet but decisive, where the room seemed to tilt into the next phase of what was coming. Arthur exhaled shakily. Then I'll be there. So will I, Everett said. I nodded once. Tomorrow wasn't just the next step, it was the turning point. The moment the victory strategy kicked into its second gear. Public exposure. I picked up the field notebook again. We're going to show the entire board exactly what she tried to hide. We're going to show the entire board exactly what she tried to hide. Those words stayed suspended in the room long after I spoke them. Everett looked both terrified and relieved. Arthur looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, realizing he couldn't go back the way he came. And Rowan slept silently upstairs, unaware of the storm building outside his window. I gathered my field notebook, my worn jacket, and the sealed evidence bag containing the now infamous bottle, proof, truth. The kind of documentation no argument or manipulation could erase. Everett and Arthur both followed me out of the house, their movements slow, tense, like men walking towards something inevitable. The morning sun hadn't fully risen when we stepped onto my porch. Birchstone Ridge lay quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. Curtains shifted in windows. Porch lights flickered on across the street. People knew something was coming, something big. The kind of confrontation a community never forgets. Officer Kellen waited in his patrol car nearby. He stepped out when he saw us. Good, he said. I was about to come get you. The board called an emergency session, and her husband showed up 15 minutes ago. I nodded. Let's go. We walked toward the HOA office building, the same place where she'd stood last night, clinging to her narrative with desperation, masked as confidence. Now the hum of tension filled the space like static in the air. Her husband, Paul Ashford, stood outside the entrance, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiating the kind of corporate arrogance that fed off intimidation. When his eyes landed on me, they hardened. You, he spat. You're the one destroying my wife's reputation. No, I said calmly. She did that herself. His jaw clenched as he stepped closer, but Kellen blocked him with one firm hand. Back off, the officer warned. This is an active investigation. You don't want to add harassment to the list. Paul scoffed. Harassment? My wife tried to help his child, and he's twisting it into a criminal act. You think anyone's going to believe this circus? Everett stepped forward, unexpectedly. I believe it, he said, because I saw what she did. Paul turned on him instantly. You're weak. She kept this community running while the rest of you cowered. Arthur cleared his throat. No, Paul. She controlled this community. There's a difference. Paul glared at both of them, but when he realized the conversation wasn't tipping his way, he straightened his jacket and walked inside, muttering something under his breath. We followed. Inside the conference room, the full board sat around the long table. Some wore expressions of worry, others annoyance, and a few, fear. These were the ones she had ruled through intimidation for years. They weren't ready to see their queen stripped of power. I set Rowan's evidence bag on the table, the impact soft but undeniable. The room fell silent. One board member, Linda Hartman, leaned back in her chair with crossed arms. "Before we begin," she said, "we want to make it clear. We're shocked by the accusations. Marlene has been nothing but dedicated." "Dedicated to what?" Everett asked quietly. "Control? Fear? Harassing families?" Linda's eyes narrowed. "Dedicated to improving standards." "Standards don't include entering someone's home and pouring bleach into a bottle," Arthur said. A ripple of discomfort moved across the table. I opened the field notebook, flipping it to the section where I detailed the exact exposure sequence. "The facts are simple," I said. "This bottle was contaminated. My son suffered chemical burns in his throat. He was hospitalized. These are the medical records." I slid them forward. One board member tentatively reached for the papers. Another leaned in. "And this," I continued, lifting the evidence bag slightly, "is the bottle with the residue. It's been secured since the moment I identified the exposure. The lab has already confirmed bleach presence." A man at the far end spoke. "But why would she do that intentionally?" "She thought she was correcting what she saw as unsanitary," I said. "Because she believes her standards matter more than the safety of others." "She was helping," Paul snapped from the doorway. "No," I said, turning to him. "She was asserting control, and she nearly killed my child in the process." Silence. Then Everett stepped forward, voice trembling but stronger than I'd ever heard it. "I tried to stop her. I told her not to touch anything. She ignored me. I'm willing to testify under oath." Arthur added, "And I'll testify about her pattern of abuse. She's been doing this for years." The room shifted. This was it. The moment of public exposure, unfolding exactly the way victory strategy required. Truth laid bare, witnesses stepping forward, the unstoppable chain reaction of accountability ripping through her constructed world. Linda leaned toward the medical records, her earlier confidence draining. "I didn't know it was this serious." "It is," I said. Another board member whispered, "If the police have the evidence, we can't protect her." "That's not what this meeting is about," Paul barked. "You're all forgetting everything she's done for this. Community." "No," Arthur replied quietly. "We remember everything. That's the problem." The room descended into murmurs, some siding with truth, others clinging to denial. But the shift was undeniable. The fear she wielded was fracturing, crumbling. Finally, Linda looked at me directly. "What do you want from us, Silas?" "I want transparency," I said. "I want this board to acknowledge what happened. I want the community to know the truth. And I want safeguards so no one else has to fear the people meant to protect them." "And Marlene?" she asked hesitantly. "She'll answer to the law," I said. "Not the HOA." There it was, the decisive break. Paul looked around, realizing he no longer had allies. His expression twisted into rage and disbelief. "You'll pay for this," he hissed. I met his gaze without blinking. "No," I said quietly. "I already paid. My son already paid. Now it's your turn to face the consequences." Paul's glare stayed locked on me, but the room around him was shifting, fracturing. The board members no longer sat upright with loyalty in their posture. Instead, they leaned back, eyes lowered, glancing at one another with the uneasy awareness that their world had just tilted. Everything she'd built, every ounce of control she wielded, had hinged on fear. And now, for the first time, fear wasn't working. Linda broke the silence first. "We need time to review this, to speak with legal counsel, to process." "You've had years to process," Everett said quietly. "You just never wanted to see it." Arthur nodded. "And if you ignore the evidence now, you're complicit." Paul slammed his palm onto the table. "None of this will hold up. You're all letting one emotional incident cloud judgment." Emotional incident. My jaw tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "My son almost died." Paul waved a dismissive hand. "Because you weren't watching him properly." Everett flinched. Linda gasped. The entire table recoiled. I stepped forward, hands steady at my sides. "Say that again." He opened his mouth, probably to repeat it louder, nastier, but Kellen stepped in between us, his badge visible, posture unyielding. "Mr. Ashford, that's enough." Paul scoffed. You can't stop free speech. I can stop interference with an active criminal investigation, Kellen replied. And that's exactly what you're skating close to. The temperature in the room dropped another degree. Realizing he had no allies left, Paul turned abruptly toward the door. This meeting is pointless. My wife will be released soon. You'll all see. He stormed out, slamming the glass entry door behind him. The silence he left behind was suffocating, but it was the silence of collapse. His influence shattered, just like hers had. Linda looked at the evidence bag again, voice thin. Silas, what happens now? What do you need from us? An official statement, I said, acknowledging the truth, supporting the investigation, and clearing my name before she spreads any more lies. Arthur nodded. We'll call another meeting tonight, a formal vote. Good. That was the piece we needed for full public exposure. The part she couldn't override from a jail cell or through whispered threats. As the board began filing out, murmuring among themselves, Everett lingered beside me. You handled that better than I ever could have, he said softly. You stepped up, I replied. That's what matters. He looked down, embarrassed but relieved. She always made me feel small. Today, I realized that wasn't me. That was her. That's how people like her operate. I met his eyes. But that power's gone now? Kellen walked over once the room cleared. You okay? He asked quietly. I am now. He nodded, lowering his voice. Her lawyer's losing ground. The evidence, the medical reports, the witness statements, it's airtight. She'll face charges, multiple. A breath I didn't even realize I was holding eased out of me. And Silas, he continued, the district attorney wants to meet you. Your professional background changes how they categorize your assessment. Your documentation is being treated as expert input. My past, my training, had been a shadow I kept behind me. But now it was the hinge holding this entire case together. When? I asked. Tomorrow morning? Fine, he nodded once. And for what it's worth, you handled today with more composure than half the officers I know. Training, I said, and necessity. He offered a brief, respectful smile before heading out. When they were gone, the office felt strangely hollow, like the echoes of everything that had happened still clung to the walls. I picked up Rowan's car seat and stepped outside, the morning sun now higher, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As we walked back toward my home, Everett walked quietly beside me. She's going to lose everything, isn't she? He asked. She already has, I replied. She just hasn't accepted it yet. He nodded thoughtfully. I think I'm done being afraid of her, or of anyone like her. That's good, I said. Fear is what kept her powerful. He exhaled long, relieved. The other board members, they looked shaken, like they finally woke up. They did. And tonight's vote, that'll be the breaking point. I nodded. Yes. When we reached my driveway, Rowan stirred inside his carrier. I set it gently on the porch and slowly lifted him up, feeling the warm weight of him settle against my chest. His tiny fingers brushed the fabric of my shirt. You're safe, I murmured into his hair. We're almost through this. Everett swallowed. If you need me at the board meeting, I'll be there. You will be, I said. Both of you. He blinked. Both? Arthur, too. He finally understands what's at stake. Everett nodded again, then glanced at Rowan with softened eyes. I'm glad he's okay, Silas, truly. Me too. When he finally left, I stepped into the house, holding Rowan close. The quiet felt different now, not tense, not uncertain, but waiting. Like the whole world was standing at the edge of something final. Tonight, the board would meet. Tonight, the community would hear the truth. And tonight, the final phase of public exposure would ignite. The victory strategy wasn't almost done. It was about to peak. The hours between afternoon and night moved with a strange heaviness, like the air itself understood what was about to happen. Rowan slept in my arms for most of it, his breathing soft and steady, reminding me with every rise and fall why I was doing this, why I couldn't let fear dictate anything. Not for him, not for me. As dusk settled, the community lights flickered on, one by one. Cars lined the street outside the HOA office, more than I expected. Word had spread. People were finally showing up for something she had always controlled from the shadows. This time, she wouldn't be there to command the room. Everett waited for me at the foot of my porch, wringing his hands. "They're all inside already," he said, "even residents who were too scared to speak before." "Good," I replied, adjusting Rowan's carrier strap. "They deserve to hear everything." "And her husband?" Everett asked carefully. "He'll try to intervene," I said, "but it won't matter." We walked together through the cool night air. Every step felt like closure tightening into place. Every porch light, every curtain slightly pulled back. It all meant eyes were watching. People were ready for the truth. Inside the HOA office, the conference room was packed. Residents lined the walls, board members sat at the long table, and at the end of it, Paul Ashford, her husband, standing like a man preparing for a battle he already knew he couldn't win. When he saw me, his expression curdled, but he didn't speak. Not yet. Linda cleared her throat loudly, banging the gavel once. "We are calling this emergency meeting to order. Tonight we will address the incident involving a minor and actions taken by our board president, currently in police custody." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "We will also address the evidence presented, resident statements, and the future leadership of the HOA." More murmurs, louder now. Paul scoffed. "This is a show trial," he muttered. "You're letting one man dictate the narrative." I stepped forward, placing the evidence bag, the medical reports, and my field notebook on the table. The room quieted instantly. "This," I said, "is the narrative." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Truth has a way of settling into a room with more force than anger ever could. I walked them through the timeline, not with dramatic flourishes, just facts. When the contamination happened, how Rowan reacted, what I did to save him, what the tests revealed, every detail aligned, every angle corroborated. Then I stepped back. Everett came forward next. He told them what he witnessed, how she ignored warnings, how she insisted on asserting authority over safety. His voice trembled, but he didn't shy away. After him, Arthur stepped up. He explained her intimidation tactics, the threats, the manipulations. The room shifted again, this time with recognition. People nodding, whispering, remembering their own experiences they had swallowed out of fear. Then Grace, shaking, emotional, stood and recounted her own encounters. Others followed. Each voice chipped away at the structure she'd built. Each voice was a piece of the community she'd silenced breaking free. By the time the last resident spoke, even the board members who had defended her sat pale and shaken. The truth wasn't just undeniable, it was overwhelming. Linda turned to me. "Silas, do you want to say anything else before we vote?" I looked around the room, at the families she'd threatened, the people she'd belittled, the neighbors who finally felt safe enough to speak. "I don't need revenge," I said quietly. "I need accountability. And I need a community where no one, especially a parent, has to fear the people who claim to protect them." A hush fell. It shouldn't take a child almost dying for people to wake up. Silence, deep, heavy, honest. Linda swallowed hard. "The board will now vote on immediate removal of Marlene Ashford as HOA president and full cooperation with law enforcement." Hands rose around the table, every single one. Unanimous. Paul surged to his feet. "This isn't over. You're all turning your backs on her because of one mistake." "Enough," Linda said firmly. "The community has spoken." He clenched his fists, looked around for support, found none, and stormed out of the building. The door slammed behind him, the echo trailing long after his footsteps faded. Outside, the night air felt lighter. Residents gathered around, some thanking me, some apologizing for not stepping forward sooner, others simply relieved. I didn't need their praise. I didn't need their apologies. I needed closure, and I finally had it. Everett stepped beside me. "She can't hurt anyone anymore," he said softly. "No," I answered, "she can't." I lifted Rowan from his carrier and held him against my chest. His tiny hand rested over my heart, warm and grounding. The world felt steadier with him in my arms. A community that once feared one person now stood together. A man they underestimated stood tall with truth in his hands. And a child who nearly lost everything now slept in safety. Justice wasn't loud tonight. It wasn't violent. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady. It was earned. And it was final. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?